Dr. Yuri Felshtinsky is a prominent author, historian, and journalist and expert on Russia and the former Soviet Union. He is widely known as co-author of the book Blowing Up Russia with Alexander Litvinenko, a former lieutenant colonel in the FSB who was poisoned with radioactive polonium in London in 2006. Dr. Felshtinsky is also the author of a number of other absolutely fantastic books. We will, of course, put the descriptions of those, links to those, in the description of this video. Before we jump in, thank you to everybody who supports the channel. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on any of the incredible guests that we feature. Definitely add a comment, it helps in the algorithm. And thank you to everybody also who has been supporting our fundraiser to help us do events. We've done the most recent one in London on the current geopolitical situation and the importance of support for Ukraine. We are going to do many more interviews. We've got more lined up in May and June, and you'll be seeing the evidence of that on the channel. So thank you, everyone who has been supportive. Yuri, welcome back to the channel.
Thank you very much for your invitation.
It's been a while. It's been 6 months. It feels almost like a lifetime, unfortunately, because of the torrent of events that are taking place. And we are now in the midst of a so-called negotiation process for peace, a ceasefire process. It feels, at least to me, that always been something of a kind of Potemkin facade of negotiations. There's some hollowness about it. Now it seems that some of the demands that are being pushed onto Ukraine are not only unacceptable to Ukraine, some of them even violate the spirit and indeed word of international law. Do you think it's the case that many Ukrainians will conclude that fighting is the least worst option now, rather than capitulating to a kind of Washington-Moscow axis of awful demands?
I think the main problem with this so-called negotiations is that there is no peace there. Trump is asking Ukraine to sign a certain agreement, but this agreement does not bring peace and does not promise peace. Indeed, this is not a peace agreement. This is agreement about Ukrainian surrender to Russia and to Putin. So the question is, what would happen if Ukraine would agree to this particular plan? And the obvious answer is that this plan will never bring peace to Ukraine, because the way it's formulated from the beginning, and I have to say that this text was written not in Washington, D.C., and not by Trump or his people. All those points, all those proposals or drafts, they were written in Moscow, in Kremlin, and Putin is using Trump to correspond these agreements to Ukrainians and to Europeans. But this is the Russian agenda, and this is actually the draft which was offered by Putin in June of 24. Basically, it includes the acceptance of annexation of certain lands. They change the list of those lands, but certain lands. The Ukrainian army, what is very important, has to be demobilized. President Zelensky should resign, and this is also a very important point. I will explain later why. And Ukraine is promised not to join NATO. By all means, this is a plan which allows Russia to regroup and to attack Ukraine again. We have to remember that the first attack happened in 2014. The second one is 22. If we start our calculation from March of 2014, when Russia invaded Crimea, and Russia, by the way, had troops in Crimea by that time, according to the Russian-Ukrainian agreement. So that's why annexation of Crimea or capitulation of Crimea became so quickly because Russian troops were there and Ukrainian troops didn't exist those years. But from 2014, Russia is fighting for Ukraine in Ukraine for more than 11 years. So for those people who lived in Donbass or in Crimea, this war started not in 22, it started in 2014. Then, of course, in 22, there was a full-scale invasion. But look, after more than 3 years of fighting, Russia actually is not able to take Ukraine. So all this talking that Ukraine would not be able to fight without American help is actually nonsense. Ukraine is without American help for 3 months now, and it's still fighting. And all Putin could do is very slowly, probably moving forward very, very slowly. He's also able, of course, to bomb Ukraine from the air with missiles and bombs. But he's not able to take Ukraine. So since 2014 or 2022, whatever we choose as a starting point, he's not able to take Ukraine. And when he invaded in February of 24, everybody kind of was expecting that he would be able to take Ukraine in 3 weeks or 3 months. And this 3 months, 2 months, we hear very often from Putin, from Vance, that without American help, you would not be able to fight in 3 months. And like today, literally, right, we heard the same from Trump, that if Ukraine would not sign the capitulation, then they would lose the entire country because Putin would take Ukraine. Putin is not able to take Ukraine. If Putin would be able to take Ukraine, he would not need Trump to be involved. He
Or
simply
North
would take
Korea, for instance,
Ukraine
either.
or North Korea, right? So Putin is not able to take Ukraine. They're doing their best to take it, and they're not able to do this. That's why the plan of 25 was, of course, built on the idea that Trump would announce that he is stopping assistance to Ukraine. Europe would be in panic, would start to force Ukraine to follow Trump's advices, because Europe would not be able to assist Ukraine, etc., etc. But this is not what happened. Look what happened in reality. In reality, Trump stopped assistance to Ukraine. Vance went to Munich to lecture Europeans that they should allow, ultra-conservatives or whatever fascists to be in charge of European states. Europeans basically realized that there is no NATO anymore, since Vance never mentioned NATO and never mentioned Russian aggression in Europe. And Europe started to arm. That's what's happening. Now, we do understand that this is a slow process, that one thing is to accept the idea that you should form a 700 or 800 billion dollars military budget for European Union, but another story is to make the weapons which are necessary to fight a war. But when you talk to Europeans, you see a great difference between Europe today and Europe 3 months ago, actually, before Trump came to power. Everybody is expecting the war. I do not know whether this is good or bad, but when you talk to people from Poland or from the Baltic states, everybody is expecting Russian invasion. And this will happen if Ukraine capitulates. This will happen if Ukraine surrenders. But I do not think they will, because they have no choice. Because it's not that Trump is offering a peace agreement, he is offering surrender. And everybody knows that if Russia takes control of Ukraine, number one, there will be no peace in Ukraine. And number two, the Russian army will proceed straight to Europe. It's not that Putin is going to demobilize his army. No, he will not. He will take Moldova first, and he then would proceed to the Baltic states. Since everybody understands this, I think Trump-Putin's plan failed. They will not get Ukraine through capitulation. I do not know if they plan to continue to take Ukraine through the military advances. This is probably what's going to happen, but they're trying to do this since again 2014 or 22, and 25 will not be easier for them.
And this point that it is a deal drafted in Moscow, because many of the clauses we see are echoed by Peskov, Lavrov, and many others over many months. So it's possible to trace the source of the intent, the strategic intent behind many of those clauses, which, the US seem to have gone along with. How would you characterize this, though? Because under Biden, we had something called sort of coercive manipulation. That was where you try to convince the administration to do what you want them to do, but without the realization that that's what they're doing. They still think they have agency. So they refuse to tackle Russia head on. They refuse to give Ukraine all the weapons it needed because they were persuaded by the nuclear blackmail threat. They were persuaded through fear of the collapse of Russia and the chaos that would ensue from that. So that's the manipulative technique. Are we seeing a different kind of technique at work in coercing the Trump administration? Is it going too far to sort of call it active measures or even talk about Trump being an asset to the Kremlin or an asset of the Kremlin?
Well, Trump is an asset of the Kremlin and to the Kremlin. There is no question about this. But this, unfortunately, this doesn't answer all questions, and I will tell you why. Unfortunately, Trump and Putin, they have the same goal. The goal is to kill world democracy. And Putin is interested in doing this because he wants to take control over Europe, and he sincerely believes that he would be able to do this. And Trump, of course, is interested to do this because America could become great again only if Putin invades Europe. I mean, this is the only case when America could become great again. Trump actually is a very simple man. And I'm sure he heard something about the First World War and about the Second World War. And he knows that that's when America became great. Because Europe was in war. So Putin is using Trump to deliver him Ukraine, because without taking Ukraine first, he is not able to proceed into Europe. And Putin actually doesn't care about Ukraine. I mean, he wants to take it, of course, but this is not the end of the story for him. This is only the beginning. And once again, he was hoping to take it very quickly in 22 when he advanced from Belarus in the direction of Kiev. But he wants to move further to Moldova. He wants to take control of the Baltic states, and as he stated in February of 22, when he just started his war against Ukraine, with the hope that this would take 3 days or 3 weeks, he says that he actually would like to return the influence, to return to Russia, to the influence which the Soviet Union had over Eastern Europe. So this was the plan, and this is still the plan. And actually, Peskov just recently, like literally a day or two ago, stated that nothing changed. I mean, those objectives which Russia had in 22 when it's invaded Ukraine, I mean, they're still the same after more than 3 years, right, of war. So Russia wants to take Ukraine, Russia wants to proceed into Europe, and Putin wants to do this because he wants Russia to be great again, and Trump wants him to do the same because that's how America will be great again. That's why you see that Trump is helping Putin as much as he is able. And it's not like he just stated, for formal reasons that, well, Americans are not going to help Ukraine. This is not the end of the story. This is just the beginning of the story. He stops the supply of intelligence information to Ukraine, which doesn't actually cost anything. He promised to revoke refugee status for 240,000 Ukrainians who lives in the United States. He is withdrawing from joint NATO exercises. There are rumors that he is going to pull American troops out of Europe. Again, there is no NATO anymore, and we have approved that there is no NATO. If President Macron is saying that France will defend European Union with nuclear umbrella, this means that Macron knows that there is no NATO. Otherwise, he would not make this kind of statement. So there is no NATO, and this is again thanks to Trump, and we see that Trump is helping Putin as much as he could. Look the pressure which he at the pressure which he applies against Canada, for example, for the same reason, because Canada is the only democratic countries in Northern America now. Well, because there is United States, of course, could not be considered to be a democratic country anymore. So we will see this pressure against Canada. We will see this pressure against Europe. We will see more pressure against Ukraine. But I would say that it might be very useful if both Ukrainians and Europeans would say to Trump that all talks are over and they're not going to talk to him anymore. This is not done so far, I think, for diplomatic reasons and for political reasons. For it's probably too sudden to think that America is not going to participate in in European affairs anymore. But that's what's happening, and America is not going to assist Europe. America is not going to assist Ukraine. Look, Trump refused even to sell Patriot system to Ukrainians for money. He was arguing, for business kind of relations with Ukraine. Let them buy weapons from us. But when they told him that they are ready to pay, he refused to sell Patriots to them. And this is a very defensive system, right? Uh, so Trump is not going to help Europe or Ukraine. Trump is going to help Putin. He is helping Putin. This will never stop. He will not change his position. This is not a mistake. This is this is his ideology, unfortunately, and that's what we are going to see. So I would say that it's better, of course, to stop talking about Trump's initiative or Putin's initiative. If Putin wants to stop the war, he may do it anytime. I mean, he could do it 3 years ago, he could do it 1 year ago, may do it tomorrow, but he doesn't want to stop them.
No, and we've had a number of episodes that talked about the militarized society and militarized economy he's created, and the dependency on war, which is going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to end. We might come to that in a minute because I find this fascinating because Putin seems to have made some terrible miscalculations, certainly in terms of Ukrainian resistance. He underestimated them. He perhaps thought of them as Untermenschen, and perhaps certainly was not anticipating the kind of resilience and resistance we've seen. But he seems to have got two things right. One is how Trump will behave, and we can only speculate as to why he had so much certainty about how Trump would behave and how that could be manipulated. But he's also not wrong about Europe. And the endless dithering and kicking the can down the road and the refusal to accept that one, Russia is targeting us, and two, that we're on our own. In fact, we're in this situation with Ukraine and it's sink or swim. At the moment, Ukrainians are doing all the dying for us, but essentially it's a continent-wide problem. We sink or swim with Ukraine, and they're pivotal in that. He's not got that wrong, and we have terms like hybrid war, grey zone warfare, etc. We compartmentalize Russian aggression so we don't have to deal with it. Is it not true that in the Russian military doctrine, these distinctions don't exist? Russia is already at war with us because it's a cyber war. It's got a sabotage war. The only thing it's not doing yet is the full kinetic war, but all its other military doctrines are essentially in evidence against us.
Well, if you listen to Russian, commentators or propagandists or politicians, they're fighting the war against Europe, and this started the moment when Putin realized that Europe and America those days were helping Ukrainians to fight. That's when the conception that Russia is not winning the war, not because they're not able to take Ukraine, but because Europe and America are fighting against Russia in Ukraine, was born. And that's when another conception, which actually was formulated by Putin during his interview with Carlson first time, that if America stops assistance to Ukraine, we would take Ukraine in 2 or 3 months. I forgot what was it, 2 or 3 months, was born. That's what Putin said. And that's why all these months until Trump became president, this idea that Ukrainians are holding as long as America is helping them was born and survived and was repeated and repeated and repeated many, many times. And the last time it was repeated by Vance during the meeting with Zelensky in the Oval Office. But that's what Putin couldn't understand in 22. That's what he didn't understand in February of 22 and during all these 3 years, that he is not able to take Ukraine, not because Americans are helping, but because Ukrainians are fighting. And Ukrainians are fighting again because they have no choice, because what Putin is offering to them is death. He is not offering peace, he is not offering life, he is offering death. And what he probably would like at the end to see in Ukraine is a Ukrainian Kadyrov or Ukrainian Lukashenko who would, rule Ukraine the way Kadyrov rules Chechnya or the way Lukashenko rules Belarus. And Ukrainians do understand this. I think they do. And for this reason, there is no way these negotiations will bring any results. It's just impossible because the state cannot commit suicide. I think it's unnatural for people to sign this kind of surrender. So, and once again, if Putin would be able to take Ukraine, he would not need Trump. He needs Trump because he's not able to take Ukraine.
And of course, Ukrainians have certainly accelerated over the last 30 years their reading of and understanding of a far more objective version of history than many Russians have been brought up on. Now, I know in the 90s there was a lot of material came out. There were a lot of good documentaries about the 30s and the terror, and there was some at least reflection on what went on. But one of the things Putin did, I believe, was to say, we don't have to think about this anymore. We don't have to, pick the scabs of the past. Let's create a mythological past, which means we don't have to feel that guilt. Ukrainians have carried on examining that. So whether you're in the Baltics or Poland or Ukraine, many people have a very good understanding of what occupation by Russia means, and they have an understanding of the erasure of the intellectual classes, the cultured classes of society. They know that that would be extermination. Um, is that one of the motivations, as you see it, for Ukrainians fighting, or is it something far simpler than that? Land, basic identity, family.
Well, I think we have to agree that unfortunately for Ukrainians, they were very slow with understanding what Russia is. Uh, Poles knew it for centuries and generations. And that's why when they had a chance to join NATO, they've done it. And we know that that's what is saving them until now, at least. The same is true about the Baltic states. They knew that they were under occupation, and they used the first opportunity to separate from the Soviet Union. They actually started the process. This was the Baltic states which started dissolution of the Soviet Union, and of course they joined NATO. We see that Finland and Sweden done the same again as soon as they realize that there is a danger around. Ukrainians never considered Russia to be an enemy. Indeed, they were sincerely believing that Russia is a neighbor and a friend. And this happened to be the main problem. And even when Russia invaded Crimea in 2014, Ukrainians, for example, didn't break diplomatic relations with Russia. Trade still, continued to exist. The Ukrainian government never used the word war in relation to the events, quote unquote, which happened in 2014. So I have to say that, well, we have to blame the Ukrainian government for this. It's understandable why this was happening, because Ukraine literally was split 50-50. And every time there were Ukrainian elections, it was really very difficult to figure out who is going to win, a pro-Western candidate or pro-Russian candidate. So this changed in 2014 when Russia invaded. They took Crimea. They started the war in Donbass. From that moment, Ukrainian started to be, how to say, pro-European or pro-Western and anti-Russian, but they lost time and they didn't join NATO. And unfortunately, we know now that this is the only move which could guarantee independence, because the so-called Budapest Memorandum, as we know, had signatures of major countries, superpowers, including Russia, and this didn't help Ukraine, right? Georgia, which didn't join NATO, was attacked in 2008. Moldova, which didn't join NATO, also, is in a very risky situation, especially taking into account that they have Transnistria, which is a kind of Russian enclave in Moldova. So this situation may explode any moment if Russian troops would ever reach Transnistria. So we know that only those countries who became part of NATO holding their independence and were not attacked by Russia. So we know for sure that those countries who are not part of NATO, uh, you know, are in Putin's eyes going to be taken by Russia sooner or later, right? And that's what's happening. So we have to say that this is also Ukrainian fault, but this changed now, and Ukraine will never be the same. In every Ukrainian family, you have people killed by Russians. I think this will never be forgotten, and indeed, I think that for this reason, Putin will never win this war. Never. And Ukraine will never become part of Russian Federation anymore for this particular reason. They do not know this yet. Putin sincerely believes that if they occupy Ukraine, then the case is closed. No, it's not. Even if they do, it's not going to be closed. But I have to repeat myself. I do not think that Putin has the ability to occupy Ukraine.
And this is another case of bad information circulating due to, I would say, an autocratic vertical with all of these prejudices built in. Putin seems to genuinely believe because he can manipulate Trump, however he's doing it, seems to believe that that is the key to victory and that he is in the ascendancy. Meanwhile, Trump seems to be getting his information either directly from Putin or from members of Putin's inner circle who are injecting it into Trump's team. But he seems to be believing this idea that Ukraine has no agency, that Ukraine has no cards, to use sort of the terminology that he expresses, and he seems to have no awareness whatsoever of actually the successes Ukraine has achieved. For instance, flushing the Black Sea Fleet, the Russian Black Sea Fleet out of the Black Sea, and the various successes that have been achieved. This seems to be a case of a rather dangerous echo chamber that is amplifying and reverberating between Washington and Moscow.
I think we have to understand that there is certain dependency of Trump on Putin. We could speculate why, and that it's not that Putin is manipulating Trump. I would not agree with this. I think Putin's simply saying to Trump what he wants him to do, and Trump is doing his best. The rest is the game. The Witkov's trips to Moscow and conversations to Putin, and then his trips to Kiev or to meet European partners. I mean, this is a kind of playing game. That's to create an impression that there is a process of negotiations where all sides are sincerely would like to reach an agreement. This is not the case. Putin is not interested in reaching any agreement with Ukraine. And the same would be said about Trump. They're interested in forcing Ukraine to capitulate, to surrender. This is the only result they're aiming for. And they have different tricks, to try to reach this result, to force Ukraine to accept those conditions. That's why they're constantly changing the draft agreements. If you do not want to do this, let's do this. If you do not want to do that, let's do it differently. But the result would be that Ukraine would sign capitulation. And the part of this capitulation, of course, includes Zelensky to resign because then Russia would demand to have new elections in Ukraine. And this, by the way, this point was addressed by Peskov recently as well, because they would like the so-called changing of regime in Ukraine. And I will tell you what they mean. They actually would want to put their own president in Ukraine. That's what they mean. They would never accept any other candidate which is not approved by Moscow or delivered by Moscow. And
Certainly
for
not
this,
Zaluzhny. I mean, Zaluzhny would be completely outside the envelope for them.
of course, but that's not what they mean. They do not mean to have elections and to have Zaluzhny as a new president. They would like to have elections and to install Yanukovych again, or to install Medvedchuk, Viktor Medvedchuk, who is now in Russia. Yanukovych, of course, is in Russia as well, and I'm sure they will find several other candidates. But all of them would be Putin's people. That's what they would like to do. So Ukrainian Kadyrov, so Ukrainian Lukashenko's. That's why they demand new elections. That's why they demand Zelensky to step down. But the main point would be probably demobilization of the army, because at this point, uh, Ukrainian army is the major force which is preventing Russia from advancing into Europe. And if you demobilize the army in Ukraine, then of course you have a Russian army, which is, which has some military experience after this 3 years of war, and which will advance into Europe, which would have, I do not want to say no army, but to Europe, which would have no army with military experience. You have a lot of
Absolutely.
motivated fight against Russia, but they will not have experience which Russians have. And Ukrainians do have this experience. That's why, for the sake of peace in Europe and freedom in Europe, they should help Ukrainians to win this war. And here the question is, which is important. So how you stop this war? And I was wrong to say to win this war. I think that this is the wrong word, taking into account that this war continues for many years, and at least 1 million people probably is dead. The word win is the wrong one, and a lot of Ukrainian territories and cities, and countryside are destroyed. So the win is the wrong word. The correct word is how to stop this war. And we know that the way Putin is conducting it now allows him to conduct this war indefinitely, because he has manpower to do this, he has money to do this, he has military equipment to do this. If he doesn't have enough, he's getting whatever he wants from Iran or from North Korea or from China. So he is able to conduct this permanent war for many, many, many years. So the question is how to force him to stop this war. And I think what's important to understand that Russian Federation, which is a huge country, is a country of one city. And that's how it was always. Nothing changed since 1917. The revolution, Bolshevik revolution, happened in St. Petersburg, in Petrograd those days, and that's where it started. And very quickly, the entire country became a Bolshevik country, right? And the same is true now. If you really want Russia to feel this war, you should attack Moscow. And during all these years, Biden administration, together with the Europeans, were not allowing Ukrainians. First, they were not allowing them to strike against the Russian Federation, which was ridiculous because Ukrainians were allowed to strike against their own occupied territory. I mean, this is almost a joke, but unfortunately, this was war. But that's how it was. The Western weapons, which was given or whatever sold, doesn't matter to Ukrainians, were given on the conditions that Ukrainians are not using these weapons for the strikes against the territory of the Russian Federation. This was changed only after Biden lost elections, believe it or not. I do not know why, but that's when Biden finally, gave Ukrainians permission to use American weapons for the strike against the Russian Federation, but not against Moscow. I mean, this was specifically said that they could strike wherever they want, but not to Moscow.
Indeed, they did
And,
send a
and
drone, didn't they, across, and it hit some
correct,
apparatchiks dachas in
correct,
Rublyovka, and the result was
correct.
interesting because a lot of Russians celebrated, actually, and made memes and jokes about apparatchiks having their dachas hit.
Well, first of all, in Russia, the entire country hates Moscow because Moscow is ripping the entire country. Everyone knows this, and that's how it was always. But secondly, well, Ukrainians had the right to use their own weapons for strikes against Moscow, but Ukrainians do not have this kind of weapons, and that's the problem is, right? So, and the reason why Moscow, demanded that under no circumstances Ukrainians would get Western permission to strike against Moscow was because they know quite well that if Moscow is under attack, the war is over. The war is over for Russia if Moscow is under attack, because everything is concentrated in Moscow. 10% of population of the country is in Moscow. All the richest people are in Moscow. The entire government is in Moscow. I mean, everything is in Moscow. And those people who lived in Russia, they know this. That very often there is no life outside Moscow. There is some, of course, other major cities like St. Petersburg, etc. But from political point of view, from financial point of view, from business point of view, there is, there is nothing but Moscow, and that's where you should strike if you want to stop the war.
So this would be energy infrastructure, transport nodes, the Ministry of Defense, the institutions of the SVR and FSB, so any
FSB,
structure of the state.
Foreign ministry, don't forget about Ostankina. I literally think that the first strike should be against Ostankina, which is central TV station. And but that's when a person named Prigozhin, Evgeny Prigozhin, sent Twitter. This was just a Twitter that they're planning to reach Moscow by foot. Moscow just stopped to exist. This was the result of one Twitter. I mean, this was incredible. Putin and Medvedev left Moscow immediately. The life in Moscow was frozen completely. There were no people outside.
All the oligarchs were in the air, weren't they? There's a brilliant map showing all the
Precisely,
planes taking off. Yeah.
precisely. All oligarchs left Moscow immediately. And some military units and tanks were going through empty streets without particular actually reason and without understanding what they should do. And this was again the result of one Twitter. not a single of Prigozhin's men, of course, reached Moscow, and I do not think they plan to do this. So Moscow is the weakest part of the Russian Federation, and actually the only weakest part. This is the only weak part because, Ukrainians could invade Kursk or Belgorod. Who cares? I mean, no one cares about Kursk region or Belgrade region. This is not important. What is important, of course, is Moscow. And this is the only important city.
Let's turn to the topic because we don't have a huge amount of time left. Let's turn back to something you mentioned here about the threat to Europe. And actually, there is an underlying strategy here, as you say, which is to, in the first instance, divide Washington from its traditional allies and then divide it amongst itself, divorcing it from its traditional values, which is proceeding apace. As you say, Trump is exhibiting the signs of an aspiring autocrat or a transition to a form of autocracy, whether that succeeds or not. So that part of the plan is working. Until now, under Biden, Washington was labeled as fascists, just in the way that Ukrainians have been since the start of the long war. It seems now that Washington are no longer fascists. This label is now being thrown at Europe. And we have this highly propagandized term that is increasing in its frequency called Eurofascism. Apparently, we're all Nazis in Europe now, and the hint there is that it needs to be cleansed. Do you think this is just sort of propaganda and positioning, or is this an indication of actual intent?
With Trump, Putin has, from his point of view, as much control of Washington D.C. As he ever could to dream about, right? There was a text published by Dmitry Medvedev, former president and former prime minister of Russia, where he calls Trump Colonel Daniil Fedorovich Trump. And those, of course, who lived in Russia, they know that he is referring to Colonel Stirlitz, who was sent, by Stalin to spy against Germans during the Second World War.
17 мгновений весны,
Not
which is the
precisely. So for Medvedev, Trump is actually their man in Washington D.C., and I'm sure that that's precisely how they look at Trump in Kremlin. Now, since there is no NATO anymore, the only issue is European Union as a structure. And I think a lot might be done and will be done using people like Elon Musk to finance, ultra nationalist, whatever, conservative, fascist parties in Europe, with the hopes that they will win local elections and withdraw their countries from European Union. And if this happens, and if there is no European Union anymore, in addition with dissolution of practical dissolution of NATO, then of course Putin could start, to invade country after country. This will make his life much easier. There are talks about joint military exercises again in Belarus in September of 25. There are talks that these are going to be major exercises involving from 100 to 200,000 troops. I have to remind you that the invasion of Ukraine in 22 started with this joint exercises which Russia conducted with Belarusian army in Belarus. And then, of course, this happened to be an invasion, not an exercise. So if we see Russian troops concentrated in Belarus again, then we know that Russia is going to invade again. It's either going to be the second attempt to take Kiev from Belarus, because again, you cannot win the war against Ukraine without taking control of Kiev. This is just impossible. And I think we would have to see it sooner or later if Putin is serious about, occupying Ukraine. Or this might be a concentration of Russian troops for invasion into Eastern Europe, which is also possible if there is already no NATO, and there is no NATO. So my point is that if we see concentration of Russian troops in Belarus, and if Ukrainians would want to survive, they would need to strike preventively against Belarus. And I actually, every time I look at the map, I understand that Russian-Ukrainian war would not be stopped without changing regime in Belarus. I think this is the most important point. Because Belarus is the only territory through which Russia could invade Europe. If Belarus is not under Russian control, Europe is safe. So from the point of view of security of Europe and security of Ukraine, Belarus should become free country and join European Union. And that's how we secure peace in Europe. Otherwise, there will be no peace.
I put this question to Ben Hodges back in 2022, I think it was, towards the autumn. And I just asked the sort of, the ignorant question on my part, which was, if we want Ukraine to win, surely, you'd have to take the fight onto Russian soil. And eventually we had the Kursk incursion. And I also asked the question, shouldn't we be trying to actively depose Lukashenko? Because that would significantly undermine, not only Putin's war plans, but also his regime. It seems that, Kursk, before it happened, had to be kept secret from the Americans and allies because they were just so allergic to that idea. The very idea of interfering in Minsk and doing anything at all strategic to undermine Putin. I mean, this is just beyond the pale for almost everybody in Europe at this point, unfortunately.
Well, I know, but I know that this is the case. I know that, by the way, we should not we should mention Ukraine as well, even after invasion of 22, which happened to be from Belarus. Ukrainians did not have this idea that Lukashenko is the enemy, and trade relations continue even as we speak between Ukraine and Belarus. So it is strange, but that's how it is. What I'm saying that unless Belarus is free and part of European Union, there will be no peace in Europe. Because the other condition would be, of course, to change regime in Russia, but this is extremely complicated issue because in Russia, the way I see it, Russia is controlled by the FSB as the institution. This is not a country where you have Putin as a dictator. Unlike a situation in Belarus, where you have Lukashenko, of course, who is a classical dictator who is hated by population, especially after the elections of 2020, which he lost, started to kill people, etc., etc., etc. So I do think that with the death of Lukashenko, the regime in Belarus will be changed eventually. But if we, in order to secure Europe and Ukraine, oh no, whatever, from attack from the north, Belarus should be part of European Union. I would say a part of NATO as well, but there is no NATO anymore. So European Union for now would be enough. But my point is that if troops are concentrated in Belarus, again, Europe will have a choice, either to ask Ukrainians to strike preventively or strike themselves. I do not really believe that Europeans would be happy with the idea to strike, to have preventive strike against Russian and Belarusian troops in Belarus. So I think it would be much easier for them to agree with the idea to ask Ukrainians to do this, but this would have to be done. I mean, when I published a book in 2015 under the title "Blowing Up Ukraine," and those days it was published only in Ukraine, in Russian and Ukrainian, and in Poland. The rest of the countries were not interested. But in that book, I actually wrote that, and this was 2015, that if we see concentration of Russian troops in Belarus, we know that Russians are planning to attack Ukraine. And then, of course, we've seen concentration of Russian troops in Belarus by the end of 21, and Russia invaded from Belarus in 22, and everybody was sleeping. So this is the problem, that if we see concentration of the Russian troops again in September of whatever, if it's September, in September of 25, we should not be sleeping again. We know that Russia is going to invade, and we better try to prevent this.
And the last area there, and this is probably quite a short one, is what should we accept then? I mean, obviously they may try to go for Kiev again. They may decide that that's actually too tough and too risky. If they look west, are they likely to probe and say challenge something like the Suwalki Gap, or are they going to go to swallow the Baltics in one go? I would have thought that Poland and Finland would be seen as too challenging. And those countries are perhaps at a higher state of military readiness than anything else west of Warsaw. So are the Baltics really the ones at risk in this scenario?
Well, I do not think that both Poland and Finland would sit quietly and look how, just wait for a moment for Russians to occupy the Baltic states, because they do know that there's the next. I mean, that's very, very easy to believe. But at the same time, I do not think that Russia would start the war on two fronts. I think they do not have ability to do this. That's what I think. I know that there are some military experts who think that it's possible that Russia might try to invade the Baltic states while fighting in Ukraine. But I would say this will make situation for Russia more difficult, and it is very easy for them now. So uh, you know, Poles are going to, Poland is going to have the second strongest army in Europe after Ukraine. I do not think that it's going to be very easy to fight against both Poland and Finland. I think the Baltic states are very motivated. I do understand that these are comparatively small countries, but when you talk to people in the Baltic states, they're ready to fight. They know that this is a possibility, and they are ready to fight. So I do not look at this situation as a unavoidable. I think it's very easy to avoid, but I think we lost a lot of time. We should be, we should start to behave responsibly, very responsibly 3 years ago. And unfortunately, the approach was that Ukrainians should not win this war and Russia should not lose this war. And this has to change. This has to change. Otherwise, we are going to face third world war. And no questions about this. That's what Putin is probably dreaming about. He has this, Stalin's portrait in front of him, right? He wants to be greater than Stalin. He wants to be great. He has nothing to lose. So we should not have this hope, which everybody had. Everybody was making mistakes during this war. Putin's major mistake was that he was hoping to take Ukraine in whatever 3 days and 3 weeks, but everybody else was made the same mistake. Everybody thought that Ukraine might be taken in 3 days or 3 weeks, right? Not just Putin, and of course the other mistake was that everybody thought, and this relates to Macron as well as to Zaluzhny, that if Russia understands that they're not able to take Ukraine quickly, if they see that they're losing people, if they see that the war is very expensive, they will stop. And this was a major mistake. They will not stop. It's very difficult to explain to Westerners that they will not stop, because this is so irrational. This is so stupid. I mean, the people are not able to believe this, that Russia is not going to stop. But Russia is not going to stop unless it is stopped. There are two ways to stop it. One would be a version of Germany of 1945 after the full-scale Third World War. But the second one, again, is an attempt, and it may work or it may not, I don't know, to force Russia to fill the war. And again, I'm coming back to the issue of bombing Moscow, because when you talk to people in Moscow, they do not know that the war is going on. They really do not. They go to theaters, they go to restaurants, they go to exhibitions, to concerts. They travel, by the way. There are no non-stop flights from Moscow to Europe, but they are traveling through Georgia or through Turkey. For them, nothing changed. Literally, nothing changed. There is a war somewhere in Ukraine, which has nothing to do with them. We are still talking, by the way, about a country which has open borders and no death penalty. So those people who are fighting in Ukraine, of course, the government creates certain initiatives for them, but it's not that they're forced to fight, because otherwise they would be executed, as would be the case during Stalin's time, for example. No, this is not the case. There is no death penalty in Russia, and the borders are open. So So we are basically talking about, and again, those people who hate the regime in Russia, those people who really do not agree with what Putin is doing, they left Russia. I mean, we see them in Europe like every day. They are all over Europe and all over the United States. So, because of this, Putin has a good supply of potential soldiers, and unless we stop him, he will not stop.
Yeah, I think that's been clear, certainly to you. And I think in the very first interview we did back in 2022, that point was made incredibly clearly. It's as true now as it was then. Yuri, it's always a tremendous, tremendous honor and a pleasure speaking with you, as well as being enlightening, and you bring real clarity to these issues.
Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your invitation.
My pleasure, absolutely.